Welcome, mademoiselles. Today is a day of charity, is a day of good deeds, because 1689 years ago, the Roman Emperor Constantine, which we already touched a few days ago, being the one who renamed Byzantium to Constantinople, he is the one who also decided to distribute for free a bunch of food to all the citizens for weeks, starting today. And this is what we're going to be doing today. I am going to perform an act of charity and give away my addons, mostly not really because of charity, but because of tiredness. You know, this is the point of the year where I get enough requests about which addons am I using and which WeakAuras is this and which WeakAuras is that. It's time to actually publish them so you can go and get them yourself and stop asking. Now, some might say a more organized and precise person would have actually compiled its addons and put a link in the description of his videos, so people would stop asking every time. Just like he would put his Twitch account there, maybe his Twitter account, perhaps his Instagram account, for sure his Patreon account. And I have none of that, but I could have, and I will have from now on at the very least, a link for the addons I'm using. Now, talking about addons, it's a good moment, it's a good video to point out some of the addons that are going to be very useful for you, that can help you quite a bit perform better in the game. I am going to completely fly over a bunch of useless addons. I might put them in the compilation at the end, but there is not really much to be said about them because they don't really do much for you. You have addons like Bad Boy, which are used to filter the chat from the spam. Your addons like Chatter, which are used to manage the chat channels, as well as the way the chat looks. You have things like Angry Assignments or Exorsus Raid Tools, which are things that are pretty raid focused and raid centered, so they're not really going to be interesting for the majority of people, and whoever is already raiding very likely is already using them. We are talking about the more combat focused addons, the more UI and target frames, player frames, target plates centered addons. So let's start with the simple ones. Let's start with the ones that don't really affect your performance or the way you want to shape your UI too much. Bottom left we have details, and then top right we have the map. In this case, this is a sexy map that I just wanted a type of minimap that can hide all the bunch of little icons that your other addons are going to spawn all around the minimap. I want them to be hidden when I'm not specifically looking for them. Nothing really special about these addons. Details is just the more accurate type of damage meter. I've seen people using Recount, I've seen people using SCADA, and then there is details, which just offers you way more options without even going into the extra plugins that you can use for details. It's just the more accurate, and more importantly, is the one that is nearly one-to-one with the numbers you will actually be seeing in Warcraft logs, which is ultimately what matters compared to something like Recount or SCADA, which are less accurate. But what about the actual UI? What you see in front of you is the bars, which are just bartender, and the frame, my player frame, as well as the target frame, which is from shadowed unit frames, as well as the nameplates addon, which is plater. Without going into too much detail, plater is pretty complicated to use. I can show you how the addon looks, and you can see from the get-go that, there is quite a bunch of options that you have to go through and click through. I am going to link you my profile, so you can save yourself a lot of time. Plater is one of the addons which is supported in importing and exporting all the various different profiles. So you can head over to WuhDo.io, which is the same place we will go over for WeakAuras, and you can also find nameplates for Plater to just import into your character, you know, have someone else do it for you. Maybe you're a tank and you're looking for some specific, tank-related nameplates, or maybe you're a healer or a DPS. You can just find them yourself rather than having to tinker with all the different options, half of which you don't even know what they do. Just have someone else do it for you and just import the whole profile. That's how most people go at these things anyways. The unit frames are mostly relevant to me, shadowed unit frames, because they don't really get to be part of my UI. When I have to look at other players, I'm obviously looking at my party or my raid, and I am not using shadowed unit frames for my party or raid. And when I have to look at enemy targets, I am using nameplates to look at them, not at their actual target frame. So shadowed unit frames is there, just because I want to have player frames and my target frames, but they don't really amount to much of anything. The only thing that can become useful is the focus target that you can show up, and its target as well. That's about it. That's the only one that is going to be more relevant. Now, I'm sure you have noticed, besides this, the UI is for the most part pretty empty at first glance. I can enter combat and make it even emptier at the bottom. There you go. So most of the UI, as you can see, is characterized by just WeakAuras, right? That's the main thing nowadays. 70–80% of your entire UI when you're in combat is going to be about your WeakAuras, what the enemies are doing, their mechanics, their cast bars, etc., is going to be shaped by WeakAuras and by your boss mods. And then most of the time, the rest of your abilities are going to be there on your WeakAura. The only other addition, the only one that's off, is going to be your cast bar. In which case, by the way, you can still have a cast bar made with WeakAuras. So technically, you can even have that inside your WeakAuras. So let's go for a second and point out the WeakAuras I'm using and the ones you are seeing most often when I am using footage from myself playing the game that you get to see very often in the videos. Let's go over the number one for starters, which is going to be the mouse cursor. Okay, the one you see with the little cross following my mouse button around, my mouse cursor around, is a modified version of the ultimate mouse cursor. This is a WeakAura you can already find in WuhDo.io in its default natural state. The one you see in my videos is the one that looks like this and is the one that has the cross in the middle just to make it more visible when I move around. It's really just very simple. You just open up the WeakAura, you add a shape to the WeakAura, you make it a cross and you center it at the point, the little finger of your mouse cursor. And that's the WeakAura for your mouse cursor. There it is. There's the mouse cursor dot. You can change it into a cross. You can change it into whatever you want. When you look at the templates, just pick whatever you want. You have all the options from WeakAuras, shapes, sparks, icons, alerts, whatever. And that's the mouse cursor. The big one for Shaman is going to be the entire suite for healing. I have made it a couple of different versions of it because one is for Mythic Plus and one is for raiding. In Mythic Plus, it is more important to show things like your stun totem, your slow totem, even things like your interrupt, things like your flame shock, and things like your lava bursts are more important to keep track of in Mythic Plus, whereas when it comes to raids, they are more of an annoyance. You don't need to keep track of them. If you put them next to your important abilities, they just clutter the whole thing. You don't need to see them when you're raiding compared to when you're doing Mythic Plus, so I basically hide them and modify them a little bit. I will put up both versions of it for the aspiring Resto Shaman players to try out. This one, the fail UI, is basically all of the errors, the red messages that you can get at the top of your UI. This WeakAura is just going to hide all of them. You have, of course, the big list of boss WeakAuras that you have to pick up when you start to progress on them, from Stone Legion Generals to Sludge Fist to Council of Blood and to the Natrius. Most of them are going to be tied to something you have to do around those boss fights. If you're not raiding, this is mostly irrelevant. If you are raiding, generally it's going to be up to your raid leader or your officer managing the strategies you're going to be using to give you the WeakAuras, so there isn't really a point to take mine. Now, when it comes to the UI for raids and for dungeon, I am using VuhDo. So, generally speaking, if you are not healing and if you're not tanking, this is mostly irrelevant. You don't need to put too much importance and too much effort into the way your party and raid frames are going to be looking, because you're not really going to be clicking on them. You're not really going to have to see exactly if they have dangerous dots applied on them or dangerous debuffs applied on them, because you're not supposed to be healing them in the first place, so it's not that crucial. Talking about frames, you can just default to only needing OmniCD. I am defaulting to recommending OmniCD over what you can make happen with WeakAura because it's just much simpler. You just download and enable OmniCD, and then what you can do is you go into dungeon, you go into spells, and then you have the entire list of spells for your classes that you want to keep enabled and show next to the party frames. It is not recommended to make this show into raid frames because there is 20 people and it's going to be a clusterfuck. For raids, you're generally going to be using Exorsus raid tool or a WeakAura, which is going to show you your healer cooldowns for you to keep track of. But for a dungeon, is something you can do. For a dungeon, for example, you're looking at mage and you're like, do I care to see the cooldown of Blast Wave to see the cooldown of Frost Nova or the cooldown of Blazing Barrier? Or do I just want to see if the mage has procced Cauterize, or if you use Cold Snap for its Ice Block, or if it uses Ice Block altogether? What about offensive abilities? Of course, it's a fire mage. Most of the time, I'm just gonna care about combustion. That's what you can enable, and that's what's gonna show up in your party frames, next to the party frames. Basically what you've been seeing in my videos whenever I am in a Mythic Plus group. This is irrelevant if you're using VuhDo as a party frame add-on, if you're using Grid as a party frame add-on, if you're keeping your Shadowed unit frames or Pitbull unit frames, party frames, it's still gonna anchor automatically to those frames. So it's just gonna happen by itself, it's gonna do it on its own. This is what you will most likely be needing if you're not healing. Back to being a healer. If you're a healer, you have to choose for something a little bit more specific, a little bit more clear, that can help you heal better. In my case, I've been using VuhDo. However, if you have an IQ lower than 135, it is likely better for you to use Grid or Grid 2, the updated version, because it is just much simpler to manage. It is much easier to navigate. It doesn't allow you as many options and as much customization as VuhDo, but it's just easier. It's gonna give you less headaches, even to just look at, you know. Let me just open up VuhDo. I mean, look at this. VuhDo looks like it's made in 2001. Still, I'm pretty sure it was made in like 2004, and it's still been like this for all these years. It's just more complicated. It's just more clunky to navigate around. I still will leave out my profile, which is technically for a restoration shaman, but given a few minutes, you can kind of get how it works, at least for the basics. Once you have the entire profile already set up, you are going into the panels, you're looking into the hot order, you will quickly realize as a restoration druid that you do not need to see Earth Shield, you do not need to see Riptide or Spirit Link Totem. You can just go into your bouquet. You can create your own new bouquets like Rejuvenation, like Wild Growth, and then apply them to whatever slot you want. Do you want it to appear here, 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 whatever you want? You select it here and you make it happen, etc., etc. This is, of course, mostly related to healers, not tanks or DPS. This is not going to be that necessary. What is also necessary for healer is better ways for healing, because of course you will be clicking on frames, meaning mouse overs, meaning you want to use your mouse when you click on these targets. You don't want to manually target each player you want to heal, which is where Clique becomes useful. What Clique allows you to do as an add-on is to basically automatically macro on mouse over every single ability you want to use. You open Clique, you enter binding mode, and then all you have to do is hover over an ability and click whatever button you want this to be mouse overed. For example, right now I have unbound my Flame Shock. My Flame Shock is on T. If I hover over Flame Shock and press T, now suddenly Flame Shock is registered as T, which means without targeting these guys, I can just mouse over, press T, and Flame Shock is going to cast. I didn't have to make a macro or keep the macro updated, etc., etc. I just did this in Clique, and it worked just like a mouse over macro. Then there is one thing, which is the battle text. I've seen a lot of people being pretty into battle text. Personally, not even sure why I keep it. It actually gives you no information you care about. It's just clutter, which is why my combat text is very fast. I have fastened it up to not stay on the screen for too long. It goes away pretty quickly. This is mix scrolling battle text. What you can do with this is also help you remembering your abilities. For example, when you put down Healing Rain, it can remember you in the notification. You can put the notification quadrant wherever you want, and eventually once Healing Rain comes back off cooldown, it's gonna tell you it's off cooldown. Let me open. Here it is. Here's the cooldowns. Here's player cooldowns. You can choose whatever text you want when the ability is back off cooldown. You can put a threshold of cooldown. For example, you don't care about being reminded about Riptide, which has a 6-second recharge. You can just put the threshold. Or if you just do want Riptide to show up on a 6-second cooldown, but you don't want maybe something like Lava Burst, you can go into cooldown exclusions or into ignore cooldown thresholds for certain abilities. For example, I still want this here, but I want to add Riptide in here. This way, even if I have a 10-second cooldown threshold, which means Riptide shouldn't appear, when I click Riptide, because I put it in the ignore threshold, it's gonna show up back off cooldown. Other things like these, for people who want something more visible, bigger, is the good old boomer Doom cooldown pulse. It's been unchanged for like over a decade, and it works in the same way as it usually did. Rather than getting a text popping up when the ability is off cooldown, you're gonna be getting an icon popping up like this. This is pretty helpful because the center of the screen is what you're going to be looking at every moment, basically, of the encounter. So having a big icon showing up, you don't need a bar, you don't need some audio help, you know, a horn, a cat meowing, or whatever the shit people use. You just get it popping up in the middle of the screen and you will be reminded, which can come in handy because, you know, you have to keep track of a lot of things and you can often forget. So this can be helpful. It doesn't really clutter your screen because it just is, you know, a single second or so of an icon flashing, so it's not that bad for your clutter, and it can come in handy in keeping you up to speed with your rotation, particularly if your rotation is not a 2-button brain-dead rotation. It can help. Talking about help, getting towards the end, we have something that by this point is pretty much no longer a help, it's a mandatory thing. Yes, you will often find some boomers, or more likely some casuals, some LFR heroes telling you that DBM is ruining the game and that you should try to do bosses without DBM because they make the encounter very easy. Yes, I know, don't get too angry at them. They are not in a right state of mind, just pity them. So, DBM. Many people are just told when they want to start raiding, maybe they want to start Mythic Plus as well, just install DBM, forehead. So they install DBM, they get into the boss, they see a bunch of bars, and they're like, okay, cool, helpful. No. The default DBM is garbage. The default DBM has way too many bars, way too many announces. You're getting your attention span, your focus dragged away by way too many things that don't really apply to you or affect you in your spec or in your role. Now, DBM has gotten slightly better over time. They have started to roll check certain abilities. This way, for example, if you are not a tank, you're going to get, by default, certain abilities disabled because they only interest tanks, but not all of them happen this way, which makes the DBM as a whole pretty cluttered when you install it and you use it without any modifications. So this is DBM. This is Castellnatria. Let's load Castellnatria. When you have boss fights, you have to start thinking about abilities that you don't care about. Because at the end of the day, what is going to show up when you look at DBM is something like this, right? Is a bunch of bars. Now, normally what you want to do is to have the two different types of bars, the small and the big one, and you want the big one closest to you. And the small ones, they can be further away because they can be 40, 30 seconds away, so that you have time to react to them, whereas the big bar is, 10 seconds, 15 seconds close to coming, so you need to prepare. If you're a DPS, if you're a healer, or if you're a tank, this is the same for everyone. Now, besides the placement, what's important is the amount of bars, because you would be surprised by how much you can get distracted as you are fighting. You are in the tight part of the fight, you have to keep up your rotation, there is an ability you have to dodge, but at the same time there is like 5 different bars that you're seeing, all ticking down. This can be distracting because maybe there are only 2 bars that you're actually interested in that bunch. So it's going to be harder for you to realize what you're supposed to do if you're keeping them all active. So what you do, as you're learning the fight, you're going to the boss, you're looking, for example, at Stone Legion Generals, and you start looking at the bars. You scroll down, and these are the bars. And you start asking yourself, how many of these actually affect me? Do I need to see all of these bars, or can I just ignore some of them? For example, something like Heartrend. Heartrend is a healer type ability, is something that healers have to deal with Dispel and with the big damage it does after. You don't need to see this as a tank, you don't need to see this as a DPS. It's the job of the healers to deal with Heartrend. Maybe, caveat, if you're a Shadow Priest with Mass Dispel, you can also help with this, so you might want to keep this up, but for everyone else, this is not that necessary. If you're a healer, conversely, something like Call Shadow Forces is not that relevant, it's not that important to you. Another thing, something like Wicked Slaughter. Wicked Slaughter is just these skirmishers jumping around and dotting some people up. you're not really gonna gain any new insight in knowing that this ability is about to come up, especially when these motherfuckers can get you 3 to 4 to 5 bars all at the same time popping up, and it just clutters your screen for no reason because this is not that important. Another important thing when you're looking at DBM is, for example, abilities that are very visible. Stasis Trap doesn't need a cooldown because it's super obvious. It's literally some bright white circle spawning everywhere. You don't really need a timer for this. It's pretty easy to see them. Maybe if you are in the order of players who are supposed to use their immunities to cycle and clear the traps, you might want to keep track of it, because maybe the third or fourth cast of the traps, it's your turn to use your aspect of the turtle and soak them all. But if you don't have to do anything with those traps, you can ignore the timer. And this is going to be pretty important for your UI. To clean up the UI, to make it less cluttered and to make you more focused on the important things. You don't need, or rather, do not expect to just download DBM and you're set. You are actually possibly making it even worse by getting a bunch of bars that you're just trying to keep track of at the same time, even though half of them are completely irrelevant to you. Now, lastly, of the important add-ons, I decided we should probably put in Opie. So Opie is a radial action binding add-on. It lets you group add-ons into rings, which are then going to appear when you hold down a keyboard or a mouse binding. So, for example, something extremely important, doing a raid fight, for example, you want to use appearance toys, right? Super important. There you go. This is your very important pre-pull toy that you need to keep up at all times, whenever it's off cooldown, right? That's what Opie allows you to do. On more important notes, you can do things like defensives. In this case, we are missing the Hellstone, which is going to automatically appear whenever it's available, and it's at the flick of my mouse scroll. So something tough is happening, there you go. Tick up, you barely even see it, and I have a defensive up, which didn't cost me another key binding, it didn't cost me another button, etc, etc. Other things you can do with this, but this is a little bit more, extra in-depth, is as a leader, target markers and ground markers, etc, etc. Now, these are all of my more important add-ons. Of course, as I mentioned already, I've left behind something like TomTom, right, for coordinates and tracking things like handy notes for map quality of life additions, things like Gotta Go Fast, which is your Mythic Plus timer. You have things like Masque, which allows you to recolor, resize, or reshape your bindings, your icons, your tooltips. Here's a quick look. You can go into your interface, add-ons, Masque. There you go. Skin settings, global, zoomed. And the icons look zoomed. If I go into something like Dream, they become a little bit more indented with a black outline. You can go up in something like Rayleigh, which is a specific thing you have to download. It's essentially like a skin. It's like a plugin. Maybe you can go into Square Edge, or maybe you can go into Circle. And this allows you to just style them. If I didn't have Masque, it looked like this, which is the default thing of Bartender. The thing you've been seeing throughout this entire video, this style of thing, looking like this, right? This color. And this remodeling is called AddonSkins, is basically the chunk from things like TuckUI or things like ElvUI, which allows you to reskin certain parts of your add-ons, or even the Blizzard interface. AddonSkins works with plenty of these add-ons, or Blizzard skins, like for example talents. I can change the talent, apply this, reload my UI, and when it's reloaded, the talents are also going to look in the style of this skin, which is like this. You can recolor it however you want and however you like. Blue, yellow, the default is like this. You can change it. You can change it to not be class color, but to be default or transparent. You can change to pixel or to 2 pixel or to thick border, shadows, whatever you want. You can find extra skins to put into this add-on to change it however you want. But again, it's not that relevant. It's part of the overall package of add-ons. It's not really gonna make you play better, I'm afraid. So the purpose of the video was to put them all together in a bunch, make you see maybe if you wanted to try a different set of add-ons that you haven't been using before, try out something new. I hope it's not your first time trying out a boss add-on, or maybe trying out WeakAuras for the first time, because this is not 2007 anymore. So what's gonna happen now is that this little baby is gonna go up in my Pastebin account, linked with all of the add-ons and all of the exported profiles that you can just copy paste into your add-on if you want. WeakAuras and things like VuhDo are going to be able to be exported like that. And the reason for this is that this is going to go into future videos, and if I find someone else asking something about my add-ons, you're going to be hearing from my lawyer, as well as from the law enforcement of your sovereign country. So you have been warned. Thank you guys for watching the video. I hope it was at least a little bit helpful for some of you. Discovered something new, some new add-ons. If it wasn't helpful, then it's your fault, and you should repent by subscribing to this channel, because if you didn't already subscribe, I am afraid you won't make it past the summer. So, see you guys soon, very likely tomorrow, and in the meantime, just stop using compilation UI, guys. Have some imagination.